listening to BostonFreeRadio.com. Hello and welcome to Words on Film, the spoken word show dedicated to moving pictures. I'm your host and movie critic, Dan Burke, and just as a reminder, you are listening to Words on Film on BostonFreeRadio.com and WBCA-LP Boston, watching and listening on Somerville Community Access TV or some community TV station that's kind enough to pick up this broadcast, and to them I say thank you as always, or you are watching and listening to me on Facebook Live, either on my own personal page or on Boston Free Radio's Facebook page. Either way you could join me. I'm glad you could join me to discuss my favorite topic, which is movies. So for this show, I have 4 brand new movies that I'm going to review for you, and the 5th slot I'm actually going to dedicate to reviewing the Oscar nominees for Best Documentary Short Subject. That's going to be at the end of the show. First, though, I'm going to start with my usual segment, which is What's Topping the Box Office. These are the top 10 highest-grossing films of this past weekend. Many of them are hits, some of them are flops, but I will let you know what the difference is as I go down the list. So there aren't too many surprises here, except that some of the films have taken a bigger drop than I would have anticipated, but there's no surprise that the number one film of this past weekend is the Lego Movie 2, the second part, which is, by the way, one of the 4 movies that I'm going to be reviewing for you for this show. It was one of those things where it had been Monday night and I hadn't seen it yet, but it was sort of a homework assignment for me. I could not go on this show and tell you guys that I had not seen the second Lego Movie. This movie was going to be huge, and I knew it. So it grossed $34.7 million in its run so far this past weekend domestically, and by domestically I mean in the U.S. and Canada. And around the world it has so far grossed $53.2 million, and that is against a budget of $99 million, which is, by the way, about 30 million more than 30 million than the original Lego Movie from 2014. So the makers of this movie, or the producers I should say, had a lot of faith in this film, and not for no good reason, because the original Lego Movie grossed a total of $469.1 million worldwide. So there's a lot riding on the second Lego Movie, but it's off to a pretty good start. What Men Want is number 2 at the box office, also the number 2 highest-grossing debut movie of the week. It grossed $18.2 million this past weekend domestically and $19 million worldwide, so a bulk of that movie was grossed domestically, and that's against a budget of $20 million. So this movie had 1/5 of the budget of the second Lego Movie, but it's off to a really great start, and by next week it should be at least a tentative hit, if not certified by its third week. That's what I'm predicting. Cold Pursuit, starring Liam Neeson, is number 3 at the box office, having grossed $11 million domestically and an unspecified amount internationally, and that's against a budget of $60 million. And I think that one of the big things that hurt this film is the controversy with Liam Neeson and a certain derogatory racial slur he used in the weeks leading up to the release of Cold Pursuit. So it's not looking particularly good for this movie, and while it's too soon to tell, I would not be surprised if this movie ultimately bombed. The Upside was number 2 at the box office last week and the week before that, and even the week before that. But this week it dropped to number 4, having grossed $7.1 million domestically this past weekend. Against a budget of $37.5 million, though, The Upside has so far grossed $85.7 million domestically and $94.7 million all around the world, making it a certified hit, inching its way up to a certified hit here in the States and globally. And also Canada, when I say here in the States. I gotta get used to saying domestically. Now, Glass has been number 1 at the box office for the last 3 weeks. This week, it took a big drop to number 5, having grossed $6.3 million domestically this weekend alone. Against a budget of $20 million, Glass has so far grossed $98.3 million here at home and $222.2 million worldwide, making it a certified hit here at home and around the world, and it's going to reach the $100 million mark at home. There's no debate about it, probably next week. The Prodigy is the fourth highest grossing debut movie of the week. Stuttered a little bit there. And it is number 6 in the box office, having grossed $5.9 million domestically. And that is against a budget of $6 million. So it has grossed nearly all of its budget this week. And even if we don't see it in the top 10, it will at least be a tentative hit by next week. And my guess is it's probably going to be certified, even with such a minuscule budget and a weak debut in the top 10. But still, low-budget movies, or comparatively lower-budget movies, seem to be a sure thing, regardless of whether they're good or not. Green Book seems to be riding high on its Oscar wave and seems to be the only movie to be doing so. It's nominated for a bunch of Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Actor in a Leading Role, Best Actor in a Supporting Role, and several, also Best Director for Peter Farrelly. So it's doing really well critically, of course, one of the best movies of last year. Here at home, it has grossed $3.4 million this past weekend against a modest budget of $23 million. Green Book has so far grossed $61.4 million here at home and $107.9 million all around the world, making it a certified hit here at home and all around the world, which is great. Aquaman is number 8 at the box office, dropping really dramatically from number 4 last week, having grossed $3.2 million at the domestic box office this past weekend. Against a budget ranging from $160 to $200 million, Aquaman has so far grossed $328.4 million here at home and $1.12 billion around the world. So while it's a tentative hit here at home and will probably stay that way, around the world it is a certified hit, which means that there will probably be a sequel to Aquaman. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is another movie that begs to have a sequel. It's number 9 at the box office, falling from number 5 last week, having grossed $3 million here at home this past weekend. Against a budget of $90 million, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse has so far grossed $179.8 million here at home and $352.6 million worldwide, making it a certified hit here in the States and around the world. And finally, Miss Bala took a big drop. Last week it debuted at number 3. This week it went all the way to number 10. And we are unlikely to see this film in the top 10 next week. It grossed $2.7 million this past weekend at home against a budget of $15 million. So far grossed $11.9 million here at home, which means it's looking to be a flop.
Imagine being fired because of who you love. Imagine being denied medical treatment because of who you marry. Imagine being evicted because of who you are. Millions of Americans don't have to imagine this. They have to live it. Because in 31 states, it's legal to discriminate against LGBT people. Get the facts at beyondido.org. Brought to you by the Gill Foundation and the Ad Council.
Hi, this is Joanna Bremis, hostess of The Joanna Bremis Show here on Boston Free Radio at Somerville Media Center. Tune in every Thursday from 1 to 2 p.m. Please stay tuned for great music, first half of the show in English and second half in Greek. Thank you.
Welcome back to Words on Film, the spoken word show dedicated to moving pictures. I'm your host and movie critic, Dan Burke. The first movie I'm going to be reviewing is The Lego Movie 2. Its full name being The Lego Movie 2, the second part. Obviously, that subtitle, the second part, is really not necessary, but in a movie that is laced with irony the same way this one is, it's really not surprising that it gave itself this subtitle. So, in this movie, it takes place 5 years since the events of the first film, which was actually released 5 years ago, and back then everything was awesome, but this time, the citizens are facing a huge new threat. Lego Duplo invaders from outer space, wrecking everything faster than they can rebuild. So, obviously, Duplo is one of those building block companies that is owned by Lego. I should say building block brands, because Duplo is a more little child-friendly version of Legos. So in this movie, with Duplo being the enemy, Lego doesn't really have a lot to lose, and hilarity really does ensue when the Duplo blocks invade the Lego universe like it does. And before I continue any further, I do have to say that I hold very strictly to a rule here on Words on Film where I don't reveal any spoilers, not of the movie that I'm reviewing currently and not of a movie that might be its sequel from before. There is a significant plot twist in the original Lego movie that involves why the things are happening in this Lego universe and basically the question of the Lego character's existence, which was explained very thoroughly. Actually, not explained, it was shown very thoroughly in the original movie. And that plot twist has its roots in this film as well. You know, the attack from the Duplo characters has something to do with the plot twist of the original film that carries on into this film, but I am not going to reveal what that plot twist is from the original. And truth be told, it's going to be very, very hard for me to reveal any plot twists in this movie because there are a lot of them. Not just in terms of the state of the Lego universe within the Lego movie, both this one and the last one, but also amongst the fates and the origin of some of the characters. So there is a lot here, but I am going to hold my tongue and try to tell you as much about this movie without spoiling anything. I'll tell you some of the basics. First of all, Chris Pratt comes back here reprising his role as good-natured, inventive, but not particularly tough Emmett Brakowski, and he's great in his role. As a matter of fact, he doesn't seem particularly recognizable in his voice acting role, and certainly not like Elizabeth Banks is as Wildstyle/Lucy, who is the heroine of the original movie. Also, Will Arnett reprises his role here as Batman, which not only he played in the original Lego movie, but also in the Lego Batman movie, which wasn't quite as good as the original Lego movie, but still it was very inventive, very creative, and had amazing animation like both Lego movies do here. A couple of new characters in this film who are taking on new roles here include the queen of the Lego Duplo characters, whose name is Queen Whatever Wanabe. Yeah, you got to say that a little quickly. Whatever one. I'm not even going to try it. But anyway, this Duplo character is played very well and an interesting casting choice by Tiffany Haddish. And of course, if you've seen Tiffany Haddish in movies like Girls' Night or even the bad movies she's done like Nobody's Fool, you can instantly recognize her voice. And this is her first time doing a cartoon voice, but given how well she does in this movie, it probably won't be her last. And Queen Whatever Wanabe is one of those characters that is set up to be the villain, and you don't exactly know if she really is the villain or if it's just the Lego characters from the original universe, from the original movie, that are just overly suspicious of her. But there's a lot going on here. There's even some alleged mind control from the Lego Duplo characters that's in the form of a song that literally says, this song is going to get stuck in your head. And thankfully, even after coming out of this film, that song is not in my head, but I do remember basically the premise of this sort of K-pop techno song that's in here. But of course, fans of the original will be pleased to know that the Academy Award nominated Everything Is Awesome song is in this movie as well, although not the exact same song that was performed by Lonely Island in the original. There are various artists who take on the song in this movie. They have sort of a kiddie pop version and then a very slow version for one of the more dramatic parts of this film, which I will not give away. Again, this movie is full of surprises, certainly a lot of ups and downs, but I was really getting into it as well. And if you were to ask me if this movie is better than the original, I wouldn't be able to answer that question because it's really hard to say, because I think both movies really complement one another. They both have amazing animation. They have some laugh out loud gags, some of the bits of irony here and there in the movie, as well as them playing with a lot of science fiction and action movie cliches, as well as sort of a play on words here and there. I think all of it is really surprising. I didn't see any of the parts coming, and the characters, especially Chris Pratt's character, Emmett Brakowski, are really endearing when all is said and done from the beginning to the end. And of course, this movie is a fun movie. And even though I've only seen the Lego movie once, and it's unlikely that I'll see the second Lego movie in theaters again, I'm usually one of those people who, if I go to a movie and see it once, I usually have the basic gist of it about how I feel about it, how I'm going to describe it to you on this show. But if I was to have a party with some friends and they wanted to play the Blu-ray of the Lego movie and the second Lego movie back to back, I would be game, because this movie is so much fun and it gets my rating of a knockout. Again, I don't think that any fans of the original movie will be disappointed by this movie in the slightest. It still is very colorful. It tells an amazing story. It's got a great voice cast by just about everyone involved, and even the songs are really catchy.
In America have pre-diabetes, but most don't know it. To let people know it can be reversed before it becomes type 2
Teens in foster care will love you, even if you don't know the lingo.
Dad bod, noun. The result of the occasional donut, always washed down with confidence.
Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council. Visit adoptuskids.org.
When it comes to parenting, there are no perfect answers. But that's okay, because you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Teens in foster care will love you just the same.
For more information on adoption, visit adoptuskids.org. A message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
Hey listeners, this is Carla from Cue the Sax. Cue the Sax is on every Tuesday from 7 to 8 p.m., bringing you an eclectic mix of music with genres ranging from indie rock to jazz to R&B and everything in between. Keep it locked to Boston Free Radio.
Welcome back to Words on Film, the spoken word show dedicated to moving pictures. I'm your host and movie critic, Dan Burke. The next movie I'm going to be reviewing for you is What Men Want, which is, of course, directly based on the film from 2000 starring Mel Gibson and Helen Hunt, What Women Want, although this film is not connected to that film as a sequel. It's more like a remake of it from a woman's perspective, particularly a black woman's perspective. And it is directed by Adam Shankman, who has had a hit or miss repertoire when it's come to the movies he's directed. Again, it's not like Spike Lee or Martin Scorsese, where these films are particularly linked by some sort of common denominator. As a matter of fact, it's kind of varied his repertoire. He's directed The Wedding Planner, starring Jennifer Lopez and Matthew McConaughey, which was a romantic comedy. He directed A Walk to Remember, starring Mandy Moore and Shane West, which was a romantic drama. He also directed The Pacifier, which was Vin Diesel's only family comedy. He directed Bringing Down the House, which was the comedy with Steve Martin and Queen Latifah. And he's directed one musical, which unfortunately was Rock of Ages, which is the last feature film he's directed before What Men Want. But all the weaknesses of Rock of Ages, which wasn't a bad film, but it was lacking. But What Men Want, I was pleasantly surprised by. Again, this is a modern female update of a mediocre film that came out in 2000, where Mel Gibson plays a womanizer who is able to, through a freak accident, read women's minds. And one of the biggest problems with that movie, not the only problem, one of the biggest problems was it wasn't one of those films where Mel Gibson was a nice guy, but it also wasn't one of those films where he was a chauvinist either. And the movie tried to make him both, and in trying to please everyone, it ended up pleasing no one. And I think that What Men Want is a lot more focused, and it is about a woman whose name is Ali Davis, who's played by Taraji P. Henson, and she is boxed out by the male sports agents in her profession as a sports agent, but she gains an unexpected edge over them when she develops the ability to hear men's thoughts. So thematically, it's kind of the same sort of premise as What Women Want, but Taraji P. Henson's character is a lot more focused, and she plays the character brilliantly. As a matter of fact, the major selling point of this movie is Taraji P. Henson in the lead role. Of course, she's been in a lot of drama films like Hustle and Flow and The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, the latter of which she was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. She didn't win, but she was excellent in that film. And usually in comedies, she plays the best friend in movies like Something New, for instance. I think the only comedies in which she was the lead are, unfortunately, those that are directed by Tyler Perry, like I Can Do Bad All By Myself. But, of course, I'm not slamming Tyler Perry. I am basically game for any movie Tyler Perry directs, as long as he is not Medea. And unfortunately, in about a couple of weeks, there's going to be another Medea film coming out, but back to the subject at hand. So Taraji P. Henson plays a sports agent by the name of Ali, and she is not only the only female sports agent in her company, she's also the only black female sports agent. So, of course, she is outnumbered and outgunned at every turn. And there is, of course, that plot that comes in the very beginning of the movie where she is very focused and intent on getting the role of partner in her firm. And as you might expect from a comedy like this, she doesn't get it. So ultimately, she goes out to a bachelor party with 3 of her female friends, and you could sort of tell the archetypes of the characters almost immediately when they open their mouths. But things get really interesting when a psychic comes to their bachelorette party who's played very interestingly, maybe in a miscast role by Erykah Badu. But Erykah Badu, who's more known for being a singer than she is an actress, although she does have some acting credits like Blues Brothers 2000 and The Cider House Rules. But this is the first film where she plays more comic relief or somebody who's intent on being funny. And sometimes she succeeds, other times she fails, but overall she's just plain weird. But I kind of got into her role, but there were some moments where Erykah Badu was on screen where I just thought to myself, what is she doing? Is she trying to be funny? Is she trying to be weird? Is it both? I don't quite get it. But in any event, a freak chain of events happens, which I won't give away, where Taraji P. Henson's character is inevitably able to read the minds of just about every man around her, including her put-upon gay assistant, Brener Wallis, who's played very well in this movie by an actor with whom I wasn't entirely familiar, but I'm going to look out for him more. He is Josh Brener, who has been in a couple of movies recently, of course, playing small roles. I think the only lead role I've seen him in was unfortunately in the movie Max Steel, and that was one of the worst films of 2015 when it came out. I had a lot to say about that. But of course, Josh Brener makes up for what he lacked in that film. And there are also some good supporting performances by the likes of Matt Greenfield, Brian Bosworth, and Tracy Morgan. I also really liked Richard Roundtree as Taraji P. Henson's character's father, who gave her the name Ali because he's a boxing coach. And I don't think you have to guess after whom Taraji P. Henson's character is named. Ali. Figure it out. But in any event, there are some good moments in this film. There's a really sweet romance that serves as a subplot. And overall, I love Taraji P. Henson in this film. I thought she was hilarious. And What Men Want is probably not only her funniest, but her sexiest role to date. And for a woman who is 48 years old to pull off being funny and sexy in a movie like this, that is quite an accomplishment. And What Men Want, even though it had some flaws here and there were a bunch of moments that made me laugh out loud. It is far better than the original what women want. What women want, I would have given a strikeout. What men want, I give my rating of a knockout. Again, there are some problems here, but Taraji P. Henson sells this movie so well. She's great. She has so much energy, and she's funny.
Is that a faucet running?
That's not a faucet. That's a river rushing through the forest. Forest rivers provide over 100 million people with clean water to drink.
What? I can't hear you because of the vacuum.
That's not a vacuum. That's the trees in the forest cleaning up the air we breathe.
I didn't know the trees were so amazing.
Yep, and the forest gives us shade, trees to climb.
That's awesome. Let's go explore some more.
Visit the forest today and enjoy all it does, just for you. To learn more about the forest and find one near you, go to discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Diane Wong here, announcing a new radio program. Let's talk about race. From our beginnings as a white supremacist society to our current existence as a white supremacist society, race is a topic that affects us all, and yet we have difficulty talking about it. Why is race so difficult? Why can't we talk openly about white supremacy? Why don't we like to talk about white privilege? Why is internalized oppression shrouded in mystery? What about lynching? What about gerrymandering and the current Black Lives Matters debate? We'll talk about all of it. Come and join us Thursdays from 7 to 8 p.m. Let's talk about race. Boston Free Radio.
Welcome back to Words on Film, the spoken word show dedicated to moving pictures. I'm your host and movie critic, Dan Burke. The next two films I'm going to review are actually films that have not come out in mainstream release yet, but they will be coming out on Wednesday, February 13th. And the first one I'm going to review for you is one that is coming out pretty much just in time for Valentine's Day. And this seems like a movie that is tailor-made for Valentine's Day. And the movie is Isn't It Romantic?, which is the latest movie starring Rebel Wilson as Natalie, who is a woman who's still Australian in this film. I think there have been attempts to make Rebel Wilson American in certain movies and TV projects, but basically everybody knows Rebel Wilson is Australian, and she's actually funnier, I think, when she has her native Australian accent. But in spite of this, the movie does take place in America, where she plays an Australian transplant who is actually doing very well in her job as an architect. And this movie starts out with a scene that shows a young Rebel Wilson as a 10-year-old girl. Obviously, she's not playing herself, but some movies like The Love Guru have had adults playing kids, and it just looks creepy. But there's a younger version of Rebel Wilson's character in this film who's watching Pretty Woman, and her mom, who's played by Jennifer Saunders of Ab Fab fame and also had a prominent voice role in Shrek 2, comes into the room and basically tells her she shouldn't be watching romantic comedies. They're basically not going to come true, et cetera, et cetera. And actually, as great as it is to see Jennifer Saunders on screen, I didn't think that scene was necessary, because the movie could have started introducing Rebel Wilson's character as an adult working for an architecture firm, and would have had her have the same grievances about romantic comedies as I do, and just about, well, everyone who's a film snob does. And I didn't think that that first scene needed to hammer home that point of her being somebody who watched romantic comedies as a kid and had somebody in her family just kind of crush those dreams for her. But as these movies go, Isn't It Romantic has Rebel Wilson's character disenchanted with love, albeit she is focused on her career, but she doesn't really believe the whole romantic comedy tropes, even though she has an assistant named Whitney who watches these really famous romantic comedies like Pretty Woman and like When Harry Met Sally while she's supposed to be working. But an accident finds Natalie, Rebel Wilson's character, trapped inside a romantic comedy. So, Isn't It Romantic is kind of like if you combined Pleasantville and 13 Going on 30 and probably a couple of other films that have that sort of fish out of water premise about this person who is known to be very familiar with the real world and then finds herself in this fantasy world of Hollywood movies. And I think from this point on, the movie does get pretty funny, and Rebel Wilson is great in the lead role. I think she is great at being sarcastic and also pointing out the unrealistic aspects of this romantic comedy life in which she lives. So, for instance, she's still an architect, but the woman who she thought was her assistant in real life, Whitney, who's played by Betty Gilpin, is now her enemy for no other reason other than plot convenience points. And I'm not saying that as a criticism towards this film. I'm saying it mainly as a criticism towards romantic comedies in general, which this movie is fully on board with picking apart and critiquing. And she also finds herself being romantically wooed by a very rich man by the name of Blake, who's played by Liam Hemsworth, who is also Australian in real life. And in this movie, in the real world, he's American, but in this romantic comedy world, he's Australian. And I think actually the effect works really well. Plus, Liam Hemsworth is surprisingly funny in this movie for a guy who I haven't actually seen be funny in other films. I've seen Chris Hemsworth, his brother, be funny in the female remake of Ghostbusters. And even though people are very quick to slam that film, I did think a lot of it was funny. I did give it my rating of a knockout when I reviewed it about 3 years ago, and I'm not taking that rating back at all. But eventually, a love triangle happens, actually almost like a love rectangle, where there is also interest from a guy named Josh, who's played by Adam Devine. And Adam Devine and Rebel Wilson have not only been in the same movies before, they were in the first two Pitch Perfect movies together, but they also had a romantic chemistry going on in those two films, particularly the second one. There was actually a really sweet scene in that film involving Rebel Wilson, a rowboat, and a Pat Benatar song, which also involved Adam Devine. But the fourth part of this romantic square or rectangle or what have you is a glamorous woman by the name of Isabella, who doesn't actually exist in the real world of Rebel Wilson's character, but does exist on a billboard that Rebel Wilson's character finds Adam Devine's character staring at right outside her window. Isabella is played by Priyanka Chopra, who is also another actress who's not known for being in comedies, particularly, well, not especially good comedies. She was in Baywatch, but first of all, Baywatch sucked. And secondly, she was a villain and a straight woman in this. And here she has some surprising comedy chops for somebody who is as beautiful as she is and doesn't need to be funny. So there was a lot I liked about Isn't It Romantic? I think sometimes there were some scenes that were kind of unnecessary and kind of deviated from the point of this movie. I did mention the first scene with Jennifer Saunders, but there was also another overly choreographed karaoke scene that I get that the point of the scene was that it was supposed to be unrealistic, but it also was almost unrealistic for romantic comedies in general. Like, it would have seemed really out of place in movies like Notting Hill or basically anything with Julia Roberts in it. And I thought it was overkill quite a bit, but I did enjoy this movie. I did laugh a number of times, and of course, I do enjoy Rebel Wilson, and I would love to see her in other things she's either starring in or co-starring in, but I think she earns the title in this movie, and it gets my rating of a checkout. And for a guy who hates romantic comedies, I did actually enjoy this one.
Bad theater seats, cheap Halloween masks, my apartment, all things with obstructed views. Add to these large trucks and buses. 18-wheelers and large buses have big blind spots, and like my apartment, they don't always have the best view. Bus and truck drivers deal with blind spots around the entire vehicle. Always take care not to ride alongside or too close behind them. Our roads, our safety. Learn more at sharetheroadsafely.gov.
You have been listening to Boston Free Radio.com.
This this is Alan Patterson. I want to invite you all to tune into my music radio show, Voices of Time, heard live each and every Wednesday from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Boston Free Radio at bostonfreeradio.com. Voices of Time, while founded on the golden age of music from the 60s and 70s in all its permutations, also visits other eras and many genres. We feature rock and roll from its original era and beyond, rock in all its variations, including prog, psychedelia, garage and punk, Motown, old school R&B, soul, blues, jazz, gospel, folk, old school country, zydeco, all music New Orleans, rockabilly, bluegrass, world music, comedy, poetry, and spoken word, and much more. Please come and join me for an adventurous 2-hour ride into the stratosphere of sound where the voices of time reverberate for all eternity.
Welcome back to Words on Film, the spoken word show dedicated to moving pictures. I'm your host and movie critic, Dan Burke. The next film I'm going to review, like Isn't It Romantic, is another film that doesn't come out until Wednesday, February 13th. And I'm reviewing it early right now because I got the chance to see it last night. The movie is Happy Death Day to You, with 2U spelled number 2, letter U. So kind of clever there, I guess. But Happy Death Day to You is, of course, the sequel to the original Happy Death Day that came out on Friday, October 13th, 2017. Yeah, it came out Friday the 13th. It was a film that was not especially scary, but it had sort of its fun moments, and you could definitely tell that many of the actors, most especially Jessica Roth, who is reprising her role in this movie, had a lot of fun making it, so I guess there's that. It's not a film that I especially loved. I think I gave it my rating of a strikeout, but on a budget of $4.8 million, the original Happy Death Day made $125.5 million. You could do the math, but that is multiple times its budget. So it had the advantage of coming out before Halloween, and that's probably one of the big reasons that it contributed to how much money it made in theaters. So I guess inevitably there would be a sequel, and almost all of the actors from the original reprised their roles in this film. I wouldn't have expected anything less from Jessica Roth, who made her breakthrough in the original Happy Death Day, and her credits before that included La La Land, but of course she was in La La Land for a couple of minutes, and here she is 31 years old and playing a college student again, which isn't the most believable, but just about every actor in this movie who's playing a college student is obviously in their late 20s to early 30s. That's not one of the problems I had with this film. It's a film that is advertised as a horror mystery thriller, which is accurate to a certain degree, but eventually there's this bizarre science fiction plot that, like the original Happy Death Day, borrowing very liberally from Groundhog Day, Happy Death Day to You borrows very liberally and unabashedly from Back to the Future 2. And I think with that kind of science fiction element, it doesn't really help the movie's credibility as a horror film. And I do think that the people who are fans of the original Happy Death Day, who kind of liked it for its hokiness and its self-awareness, might be disappointed by this film. But with that said, I did enjoy this film for its self-aware and funny moments. There are pretty funny ways in which Jessica Roth's character, whose name is Tree, gets herself out of this time loop by killing herself, although I would imagine that she would probably just have to face the killer again and again rather than killing herself. But again, these ways in which she kills herself almost seem even more of a ripoff of Groundhog Day than the original. But there was one way in which she killed herself in which I laughed. So at least Jessica Roth is the strongest thing about these Happy Death Day movies. I hope they don't make a third one, but I did like Jessica Roth in this one, and I am actually looking forward to seeing her in other films, provided that one of her this might be an asset or a liability, but she bears a strong resemblance to another actress who is around her age, a little older, whose name is Annabelle Wallis, who has been in movies like the 2 Annabelle films. Of course, her being named Annabelle and the movie being named Annabelle, I think is a coincidence. And she was also in the movie Tag from last year, but the two of them look so much alike, it's crazy. But Annabelle Wallis is British, whereas Jessica Rothe is American, so I guess there's that. But in any event, people are going to easily mistake the two for the next couple of years, but in any event, that was just one of those crazy things that I point out here. But I think the movie here gets a little bogged down by the science fiction elements in that the movie continues not too long after the original Happy Death Day left off, where there is a minor character who says probably one of the stupidest lines I have ever heard in a movie in the original Happy Death Day, and he says it again and again and again in this one. It's a little dirty, so I won't repeat it for this show, but here he is the central character who's actually working on a science project involving this sphere-shaped monolith that they keep in a lab, and of course there is a dean in this film who serves as the bad guy who's not the serial killer, who's trying to get this whole project shut down. Again, that's another subplot that was pretty unnecessary, but had some moments for laughs here and there. But I would imagine if I was a dean of a college and I found science students working on this elaborate machine that creates a portal to another dimension, which it actually does in the film, I'm not making this up, I would tell the other faculty to call the Nobel Prize Committee and let them know about this experiment, even if it doesn't work. But plot convenience sake, the dean is a bad guy, and eventually Jessica Rothe's character gets transported to not only another dimension, but one in which she has to relive her birthday over and over again. But as the day continues, she notices that unlike the first movie, there are some notable differences between her birthday, in which she lives over and over again in this dimension, and the one in the original film. And I think the science fiction elements take away from the slasher elements of this film. Of course, she's trying to get back to her original dimension despite some flaws here, despite some advantages that this dimension has over her original home, which would have been an interesting concept, except for the fact that there's also a serial killer on the loose, and she still finds herself obligated to find that serial killer. I didn't find that entirely necessary, but I am giving Happy Death Day 2U a marginal recommendation of a checkout because I did like the comedic elements, and I did think they worked a lot better in this film than the last film. And again, it's not a great film. It is tonally uneven, but I do respect the fact that this movie has even more of a sense of humor about itself than the original. And I got a few laughs out of this film, despite a slow beginning. And Jessica Rothe, I do like quite a bit.
All across the country, people are coming together to speed up what we can learn about health. The All of Us Research Program is calling on 1 million people to join us as we try to change the future of health. For your family, for future generations, for all of us. Visit joinallofus.org and find out how you can become one in a million.
Never Stop the Madness, Tuesdays at 9 p.m. BostonFreeRadio.com.
Welcome back to Words on Film, the spoken word show dedicated to moving pictures. I'm your host and movie critic, Dan Burke. And instead of reviewing one film for this last segment where I review movies, I'm instead going to review the Academy Award nominees for Best Documentary Short Subject, which I think I will be able to review for you in one segment because I only have 7.5 minutes to speak, but I do think that telling you the plot of these short subjects won't take a lot of time, and I'm also going to reveal to you what I think is the best and what I think should win. I'm not going to tell you what will win because I think one of the least predictable categories in the Oscars are the shorts, not just the documentaries, but also the animated shorts and the live action shorts. So many people in the movie industry vote for these categories, and it's really hard to tell what they like or appreciate over other categories. So I always get this one wrong, but I'm going to try my best. But first, here's a summary of the 5 nominees for Best Documentary Short Subject. The first one I saw was a movie called Black Sheep, which comes out of the UK. And it's about this citizen of Great Britain who is a black man whose parents are Nigerian. And it's unclear whether or not he was born in Nigeria and immigrated to Great Britain or if he was born in Great Britain. But either way, he is the subject, unfortunately, of some racial discrimination, both in his London flat and also when his family moves out to the countryside and he moves into a predominantly white town. So what's interesting about this film is it sort of bends the rules about documentaries in the sense that the subject of the movie, who is the young black man, is telling the story directly to the camera, almost sort of telling the camera and vicariously the audience a story about his life. And also the parts of his life that he's telling are acted out dramatically. And I've never seen that in many documentaries, let alone ones that are short subjects before. But this is one of these films that when I saw it, I immediately wanted to know more about this kid and also how he grew up, how he overcame racial discrimination, and also how he became more true to himself. I really wanted to see that. And I think this would make a great feature-length film. The second movie I saw was one called Endgame. And this is more of a traditional documentary that's more of a fly-on-the-wall perspective. It's from the United States, and it's directed by Rob Epstein and Jeffrey Friedman. And it is filmed primarily in San Francisco, and it details the lives and the preparations of those people who are undergoing hospice. And this is a movie that really tugs at the heartstrings. There are so many hospice patients here, and this might be a little bit of a spoiler, but I don't think too much. But just giving you a heads up, all the patients that are documented in this documentary, Endgame, die by the time this film's released. So they don't die on camera. That might be spoiling some things, but still watch this documentary because it is heart-wrenching, yes, but it is also excellent. And it's a film you can catch on Netflix. The other documentary I saw was also one that was unorthodox. It's directed by Marshall Curry, and it's called A Night at the Garden. This is a movie that depicts, actually it doesn't depict, it documents real footage taken in Madison Square Garden in New York City on February 20th, 1939, where a number of Americans, 20,000 of them, I mean mostly Americans, but some other people of nationalities as well, come together in the Madison Square Garden to celebrate, and I'm not making this up, this is something that actually happened, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. And what's really ironic about this event is it's largely forgotten, and the filmmaker Marshall Curry had to actually do his research and splice together all this footage together in this one film. There are no interviews in this film. There's also no voiceovers or any kind of introspective, but it shows you a really dark and scary moment in America's history. What parallels that draws to today's times, I'm not going to elaborate upon that. That's another story for another time. Plus, I'm running out of time. But it's very excellent to see this film as well. It is scary, but not for the reasons that you think. The fourth documentary that's nominated for Best Documentary Short Subject is Lifeboat. This is one that's more the traditional documentary, and it is also heart-wrenching. It's directed by Bryn Mooser and Sky Fitzgerald, and it is filmed in Germany. Actually, it's filmed on the seas between Germany and North Africa, where there are many refugees from countries like Cameroon and Cote d'Ivoire who are escaping persecution and poverty and cramming themselves onto these boats that are not fit for half the people who are actually on the boat. And what's really significant about this movie is that there's a nonprofit organization that has lifeguards on their own boats who rescue these refugees. It's a really moving film. It also really puts things in perspective, especially for people who live in developed countries like in Western Europe and even in the United States. It really puts a lot of things in perspective. And the fifth and final nominee for Best Documentary is Period, End of Sentence. This is a film that is made by an American filmmaker, but it takes place in India. And it involves women and the taboo subject of their period. In fact, it's a subject that's so taboo that even in the more rural, underdeveloped segments of India, it's just something that nobody talks about, not even women, until there is a company that actually manufactures tampons for these women. It's a very interesting and unexpectedly enlightening documentary. So, of these 5 documentary short subjects, the nominees are Black Sheep, Endgame, A Night at the Garden, Lifeboat, and Period, End of Sentence. Which one do I think should win for Best Documentary Short Subject? I am putting my guess, not necessarily my money, on Lifeboat. The reason being is because I thought it was the best documentary, not just in terms of its subject, but also in terms of the people that are interviewed for this documentary, both the people who are rescuing these refugees and the refugees themselves. It's really insightful, despite this movie being only about 20 minutes long, how much information they could get into this film without making it seem crammed.
Hi, we're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that our daughters have what they need to grow and learn. But that isn't the case for nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. that struggle with hunger.
Childhood hunger is a heartbreaking reality that Feeding America is working to change. Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste and provides it to families and children in need.
You can help kids in need in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Every Tuesday at 3, something special happens on Boston Free Radio. Why, it's Toppers with your host, Gil. Toppers, spinning the tunes that today's youth demand, from Justin Bieber to Lady Gaga to the Fleetwoods, and, on occasion, Hoagie Carmichael. If you missed the program, you can check out the archives at Toppers Radio, that's one word, .blogspot.com. Toppers.
Welcome back to Words on Film, the spoken word show dedicated to moving pictures. I'm your host and movie critic, Dan Burke. And now that I've reviewed all the films that I have time to review for this show, I still have a huge backlog of films that I have a checklist that's still going. I'm going to get to those films eventually, but I definitely don't have time for the rest of the show. I do, however, have time for my final segment, which is what's coming up next. These are the films that are coming out primarily for the weekend of February 15th to 17th, but because this coming Thursday is Valentine's Day, there are several films that are coming out in wide release on Wednesday, February 13th. So I have seen 2 of those films, Happy Death Day to You and Isn't It Romantic? And I think I've gone into enough detail about what these movies are about in my previous review, so I'm just going to cut it short by saying that I already have reviewed these films. I'm not saying whether or not I recommend these films, but I'm telling you that Happy Death Day to You and Isn't It Romantic are coming out in theaters tomorrow in wide release. And while I've already reviewed them, I would definitely leave it up to you whether or not you want to review them. But there are a few movies that are coming out in theaters starting tomorrow in wide release that I have not seen that I will eventually review. One of them is Alita Battle Angel. This is the latest from director Robert Rodriguez, and one of the producers is James Cameron. It's a movie about a deactivated female cyborg that is revived but cannot remember anything of her past life, and she goes on a quest to find out who she is. And I've seen seen the posters for Alita Battle Angel, and I of course, have avoided previews at all costs. It is a little freaky to see the lead actress, Rosa Salazar, with these giant eyes. And that might freak me out when I'm watching the film, but it's a film that looks promising. It has a great roster of actors in the film, including Academy Award winners Christoph Waltz, Jennifer Connelly, and Mahershala Ali. I would be very interested to see this film. It's a film I will see. I won't review it for you next week for a reason that I won't reveal right now, but I will reveal toward the end of the segment and the show. But this is a film that's going to be on my list. I will eventually review it. Another movie that's coming out on Wednesday, February 13th is Fighting with My Family. Now, this is a movie about a former wrestler and his family who make a living performing at small venues around the country while his kids dream of joining WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment. This looks like a British film, particularly because one of the actors in the film is Nick Frost, who usually collaborates with Simon Pegg. Unfortunately, Simon Pegg is not in this movie, but one of the big actors that's in this movie is none other than Dwayne Johnson, who for the first time in several years seems to be embracing his previous life or previous career in WWE, which I think, like John Cena, he hasn't completely given up WWE. He still makes rare appearances, but he's come a long way since he was The Rock. The movie also co-stars Florence Pugh, Lena Headey, and Soraya Jade Bevis. This is a movie that looks very interesting, and I would be remiss not to see this. So this is a film I definitely will see, and I will eventually review it for you in the coming weeks on this show. Another film that's coming out tomorrow, and in what looks like wide release, is one called Pájaros de Verano. And given the fact that you probably don't know what I said unless you speak Spanish, this film might be coming out in limited release, but it looks pretty interesting nonetheless. It takes place, the name actually means Birds of Passage, and it takes place during the marijuana bonanza in Colombia, which was a violent decade that saw the origins of drug trafficking in that country. And there is a character named Rapayet and his indigenous family who get involved in a war to control the business that ends up destroying their lives and their culture. That sounds amazing as a plot premise. And while I don't usually go out of my way to see foreign films, there are a number of films that are out in the Boston area where I go to see movies. There are some that come out in India or that are from India or from China, and I usually skip those. Not because I'm biased, or it's just I only have so much time to see so many movies, and the films that come out in America usually are the highest priority on my list. But that one, Birds of Passage or Pájaros de Verano, I'll seek that out if it's playing in a theater near me.